Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the bass player and songwriter and much more. It's the one and only Greg Norton, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love and poetry. One-time member of Hüsker Dü and is currently in a new band called UltraBomb, who have got a tour coming around the USA in May 2023. And they also have a new live album which is titled Time to Burn, which is available from all good record shops and also online. Do check it out, it's absolutely stunning. But anyway, this is the interview with Greg. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to that exciting subject that was the early formative years. This is after I mentioned that my first single and first love was David Bowie with Space Oddity. Anyway, Greg, it's over to you.
It's funny that you mentioned Space Oddity. Back in the 60s, it wasn't unusual for 45 records to be included as a promo in various products. And my mom bought a box of crisps, and inside that box was the David Bowie Space Oddity, like 45, which was kind of funny that you mentioned that. So that's like one of the first records that I ever actually owned, because of course I grabbed it and kept it. But I had a very varied upbringing in music. My dad loved big band jazz, Stan Kenton in particular. He really loved Tony Bennett, the singer. And I've got two older siblings. My sister was, listening to the Beatles as all that stuff was coming out. And then my brother was listening to, Hendrix and Zeppelin as all that stuff was coming out. So, definitely listened to music my entire life growing up. And then when I was 14 years old, I lied about my age and got a job downtown St. Paul and started working as an usher in a movie theater. And right next door was a record store. So I would always just hang out at the record store. And really, this is like probably 1973 and 72 and 73, there were so many incredible records that got released. Being turned on to all of that as it's coming out, and plus the two clerks who worked there all the time, they were into jazz. So not only was I being introduced to all of this great new rock and roll that was coming out, but I was also being exposed to John Coltrane and Miles Davis and Ornette Coleman and all these other jazz greats. And also at the time, then I discovered on my own, independently of that, because they had a section in the store, but electronic music, so Morton Subotnick and Wendy Carlos and things like that. So
yes.
I just really kind of dove in and which probably explains why I'm kind of a musical freak.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because my parents, I suppose at that age or that time in their life, they got married in the late 50s. I mean, they were very working class. So I think they when they got married, that was one of those kind of people who didn't ever have borrowed money. So they sold all their possessions, and a record player appeared in our house bungalow, actually, in the early 70s with a couple of records which had a profound effect. One being the Carpenters. I love the I love the lyrics of the Carpenters. And then my brother was 7 years older than me, and he kind of had various prog rock albums like Yes and Genesis and Wishbone Ash. But he also bought, this was kind of early on in the 70s or mid 70s nearly, was Elton John's Goodbye Yellow Brick Road and Sergeant Pepper, and obviously the Beatles had only just broken up, but to me they seemed like a band from a very different period. But you thought they'd only been 3 years, and there was no cultural kind of significance to those two albums at all. But I would sneak into his room and play them religiously, and became kind of obsessed with things like, some of their songs on the second side or the fourth side of Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. So having an older brother or sister is always quite good, isn't it, for sort of musical directions as well?
Yes, for sure. Yep.
And then, so with your sort of, because I've always just maintained the being a fan. When did you decide you wanted to sort of go up a notch and sort of a musical instrument appeared in your life?
Uh, I got my first bass guitar on my 14th birthday, and just kind of dabbled around on it a bit. Had a someone in the neighborhood who gave me some lessons, but he wasn't really a teacher, much of a teacher, I should say. I mean, he wasn't. He was just a couple of years older than me and knew how to play. But uh, and I had a lot of, like, in high school, I had a lot of friends that were very musical, uh, and they had bands and all of that. And I never felt like I was quite up to their level.
Yes.
Uh, it was really in 70. I graduated in 77, so uh, and towards the end of my senior year, started to hear about bands from England that like Ultravox, and then in the following year in '78, I started working in record stores, and in America, and as well as in Britain, all of these great punk records were coming out, and so punk blew my mind and made me realize, like, I don't have to be as technically proficient as my friends in high school were. I shouldn't be a bit embarrassed about my level of ability. I can get out there and play it and express myself, and so that's really when I kind of dove full in, right?
Yes, yes, I know. I expect you were quite intimidated when you saw someone like John Entwistle sort of whizzing up and down the fretboard, thinking,
Right. Yep.
Or Chris Squire from Yes. I think people like that. But then, because a lot of people who I've interviewed, bass players, I mean, they often picked it up because, I don't know, they thought, well, this has only got four strings, and I'd be able to sort of yes, have a go. And Lemmy from Motorhead, I think he started as a rhythm guitarist and thought this is a bit difficult, but then he got the gig with Hawkwind, and then from Hawkwind it was Motorhead, and bass playing was one of those things. And so you had but you mentioned jazz at that stage. Did any of the jazz musicians kind of influence you, or were you just much more sort of into listening to jazz at that period of your life?
Well, definitely, jazz had a heavy influence. The Miles Davis, his, once he kind of went electric, all of that stuff was a huge influence. Just listening to, Weather Report. I mean, Jaco Pastorius to an extent, but Stanley Clarke was, I really, really liked the way he played. And, and also at the same time, there were a lot of great funk records that were coming out, uh, Funkadelic. They were, what did they put out? Maggot Brain in '72, maybe.
Yes.
Uh, the Larry Graham records, all of the Sly Stone records. So jazz, funk, and rock were all big influences. Um, Billy Cobham, the jazz drummer, put out an amazing record called Spectrum, and I think that came out in '72. And that record, or maybe '73, that record absolutely blew my mind.
Yes, absolutely. So you mentioned Ultravox. What was your which is a band that I just remember sort of becoming huge in the sort of early '80s. I mean, what was the first gig you went to that you were particularly sort of blown by, or the first gig you went to? Because it's always going to be exciting, the first ever moment.
There were a lot of concerts, arena concerts that I went to when I was in high school. One that particularly stands out, though, was ZZ Top. Their first appearance in Minnesota was at the St. Paul uh, Civic Center theater section, which was an old old theater, which actually it's been long torn down now, which was too bad. It was a great venue. It probably held maybe 1,000 people,
Right.
but it was their very first time through Minnesota, and it was just three guys that came out, and they just totally rocked. Um, Another concert that I saw there was Nectar. Nectar was a mind blowing experience, you know. Uh, and then skip forward to 1978 after I meet Grant Hart, and we started going to the Longhorn Bar in Minneapolis to see shows, and Para Ubu played, and that was an incredible experience.
Yes, I would imagine seeing Dave Thomas in full glory in that period was it Modern Dance? Had that sort of come out by then?
Yep, that was the record that they were touring, was Modern
No.
Dance. Yeah.
Yes. So what was the first kind of British punk band you saw at that stage passing through Minneapolis?
Let's see. Well, the Buzzcocks played at the Longhorn, and they had Gang of Four on that bill, and Gang of Four was absolutely incredible. They blew the Buzzcocks off the stage that night. That was a really great show. Uh, seeing the Jam, seeing the Stranglers. Uh, yeah, just of course now I'm blanking on
Yes. I was just
under
wondering.
pressure here. The brain is going like, give me a second to catch up. So, but yeah,
Yes.
definitely saw a lot of great acts back then.
So when did you think, right, I've got the bass. How did the sort of the early band sort of become, a unit? Because you obviously mentioned Grant there. So did the two of you sort of have dreams of sort of forming a sort of outfit?
Uh, yeah, we did. Grant and I. Grant actually brought his drum kit over to my house, and we had it set up in my basement, and we would fool around with stuff. And he had a Farfisa organ that we would also set up, but it was just really just more for a laugh than anything else. And then the uh, over the winter of 1978, going into 1979, Grant and I were working in a record store together called Cheapo, and there was our manager Charlie Pine, who was a couple years older than us. A group of us were out just at a local, corner bar, and Charlie came back from getting drinks at the bar, and he says, "Grant, we have to put a band together because I saw that they have bands that play here." And so um, I asked him about it, and they said, "Why, do you have a band?" And he said, "Yeah, I do." And they said, "Great, you're playing here March 30th and 31st." So at that point, Grant's like, "Well, I know a guy that goes to McAllister College, which was right by Cheapo, and he's got a Flying V guitar." That was Bob.
Mm.
So the next day, Grant and I pick Bob up, bring him over to my house. We jam through a bunch of Ramones songs, and it's like, okay, yeah, Greg uh, will be fine on bass. And so that's like in late January, the entire month of February and early March, we start uh, rehearsing with Charlie Pine. He's playing keyboards. We put together 3 sets of cover songs to play at this bar. And it was, we played Fast Cars by the Buzzcocks. We did Non-Alignment Pact by Para Ubu. We did some Dave Edmunds, some Elvis Costello, some Ramones, some Gene Vincent, some Eddie Cochran. I mean, it was a very eclectic mix of songs that we put together. And when we played those first 2 shows, Bob, Grant, and I were like, "Hey, this is really fun playing together. We should keep playing," but we didn't necessarily want to keep playing with Charlie. So after those 2 shows, the three of us started rehearsing um, together and writing our own music. And that's really how Hüsker Dü started. But kind of getting back, one of the best motivators to learn how to play is you go out and you get yourself a gig. and then you don't have any choice but to learn how to play. Otherwise,
Yes.
you get up there and just be fumbling about. So
Yes, I think I was doing an interview when a couple of years ago with, is it J from Twisted Sister, guitarist? I think they spent the entire 70s as a band sort of touring or playing around New York, and he'd sort of, but no record label would touch them. But he sort of said, you need to play about 500 shows before you've cracked it. I'm not sure if that seems a bit of an exaggeration, but he did say playing live. And most people have said having those kind of hours under your belt is kind of essential, especially when you start to perform in bigger venues. And sometimes, especially when you get sort of hoisted onto a festival stage and you're thinking, thank God I've learnt this by sort of muscle memory, because my nerves are going to completely be shot otherwise. So yes, playing live is kind of essential. And I know, was it Malcolm Gladwell said, is it 100,000 hours you got to perform before you hit your masterpiece? I think it was kind of a bit of a creative license there, but he talked about the Beatles and the fact that they would have done 100,000 hours before Sergeant Pepper. So it's a nice idea, isn't it? But sort of, I suppose it's like an apprenticeship, isn't it? Those early days.
yeah, I would agree with that. The number that I had always heard was that it's kind of takes about 10,000 hours to really have a grasp of your instrument. So
Yes. And did you and Grant, did you sort of hit it off as a really good sort of rhythm section for the band? Did it feel like a good chemistry between the two of you?
oh, absolutely, yep.
That kind of work.
I mean, it was good chemistry between the three of us right from the go. I mean, we were all mates, and um, and we were having the time of our life. It's just having a lot of fun.
Yes. And did you easily get sort of a record label? Did you get interested in record labels quite quickly when you sort of began?
There was a local record label called Twin Tone that they put out the first Replacements records, and we had submitted a demo tape to them. There were three principals in Twin Town, and we sent a 3-song demo. Each one of them liked a different song. None of them could decide on the same song, so they decided to pass on working with us. So when we recorded Statues, then, which was our first single, we put it out on our own label, Reflex.
Right.
And uh, a little while after that, we had met Black Flag, and so then we started corresponding with them, with SST, in hopes that they would put the record out. And we had sent them Land Speed Record, and they weren't necessarily interested in doing Land Speed Record at the time. But Joe Carducci said, Mike Watt from the Minutemen, they have their own label called New Alliance. I think Watt might want to put it out. And Watt, when Joe asked him, Watt said, we'll put it out. I don't even have to hear the tape.
Right.
So that was how we started, got Land Speed Record out. And then we did another record on our, for Reflex, our own label. And then finally SST was ready to work with us. And that's how that started. Around the time that we were recording Zen Arcade, we were starting to get some major label interest, but most of it was, from a lot of, record labels that we weren't really interested in working with. We ultimately end up signing with Warner Brothers towards the end of 1986, mainly because we felt that was the best fit for us. They weren't going to mess with what we were doing. They weren't going to try to, turn us into something that we weren't. And they would have loved to have put out Flip Your Wig, but that was the last record on SST. And then, of course, we turn around and give them a completely different type of album in Candy Apple Gray.
Yes.
And then we follow that up with a double. So I think they weren't real sure exactly what to do with us at that point. But, as Hüsker Dü was breaking up, we were scheduled to go into the studio for Warner's to record that our third album for them. But that never happened. So
no. Were you kind of amazed in those early days where you just saw the sort of songwriting between, well, between the members, because obviously Grant probably hadn't written many songs before, and I don't know about Bob, but I mean, suddenly the songs start to come, and there've always been such great lyrics, and there's kind of great sonic sound to with sound to them. Were you quite sort of mesmerized with what was coming out next?
yeah, it was fascinating. In the early days, all three of us were, writing a lot and collaborating a lot. Uh, Bob basically just would start churning out song after song after song. I mean, there are so many Bob compositions that were maybe never made it out of rehearsal or got played at a gig maybe once or twice and then dropped because he came up with something better, and it got replaced in the set. Uh, Grant would take a little bit longer to get his material together, but Grant's songs were usually really solid right from the get go. Um, so the one thing that you don't anticipate then is the songwriter battle between Bob and Grant, and which it as that got more intense, that's when I just kind of consciously decided to step back from that. For one reason, it became more difficult for me to get material worked in because sometimes I felt they weren't necessarily giving their best effort to what I was trying to do. And so it's like, all right, fine, you guys take care of the songwriting.
Yes. So what was the process? Did you used to sort of jam a riff together and then bring the lyrics, or did people bring the kind of the overall idea of the song with the lyrics? I just wondered how this all sort of would come together.
With Bob and Grant and myself, basically, yeah, it would be a song with uh, usually it would be all together, the music and the lyrics. By the time that it would be presented to the group, sometimes it would just start off as just the music, and then the lyrics would come after that. But um, a lot but mostly it was like, okay, here's a new song I have, and it's already formed.
Yes.
Um, mhm.
Yeah. And did you? I mean, there was a kind of one of those kind of epic jam moments, recurring dreams. Did you? Was that a 14-minute sort of like psychedelic thrash song building up? Was that something that you would do a lot in the studio, just or in rehearsals? Those kind of moments of kind of jamming together.
I recurring dreams was something that we had been playing live as to end the set, kind of a big noise piece that then we could you know lean the guitars up against the amps as we walked off and let the feedback wash over the crowd. uh, and when we went into the studio, we were uh, basically, when we laid that down, we were just warming up, and Spot had the presence of mind to hit record. So the take on the record was recorded straight to 2 track, and it just turned out fantastic. And when we got done, we're like, "Wow, Spot, I hope you recorded that." And he's like, "Oh yes, I did." So yeah,
Yes.
yep.
And what's your memory of recording 8 Miles High? Because that's one of those songs which is just kind of it's amazing, but it is also emotionally, it's phenomenal. And I just could imagine playing it would have been a kind of both intense and exhausting at the same time as exhilarating.
We worked up 8 Miles High to play when we did a gig at Folk City in New York City, and we felt that doing a Birds cover would be appropriate, and but it just turned out so good, and Bob's vocals are, yeah, I mean, they cut to the core, and so we decided, let's put that out as a single. Uh, Always a great one live, and I'm just super happy with how that came out, and the fact that a lot of people are like, "Holy cow, that's the greatest cover ever," So
Yes.
I'll take
Well,
that.
yeah, well, absolutely. Because I think with the NME, they used to bring out sort of, well, on a weekly paper, but that would often include a sort of free 7-inch single played at 33 and a third. And there was a version of you doing, is it Ticket to Ride as well? So I think that was,
Yes,
and
Ticket to
that,
Ride.
which was also a great version as well. Was it kind of those kind of covers that you would quite, love playing live, but also jamming in the studio?
It's yeah, no, we loved playing them live. Uh, Generally in the studio, we were on a tighter budget, so Husker had a reputation for always touring the record that we were about to record, as opposed to touring the record that just got released. So early on, people would be confused because we'd play a show and they'd be like, "I've never heard any of these songs before. You didn't play hardly anything off the record I just bought." And we were on our way to California from Minneapolis to record, so we wanted to be playing those songs. So when we got into the studio, the material was tight. We didn't necessarily do just a lot of jamming in the studio. We just didn't have time for it. So I think the Ticket to Ride on the NME's single was a live cut.
Right. Yes, from
Yeah,
memory it was. And I know
yeah.
when listening to
Here,
people
I'm
like,
just going to show you this real quick because it's the only gold record Husker Du ever got.
oh my God, there it is.
Yeah,
I've got mine somewhere, but
which is crazy. We got a gold record for a free single that came out in Britain through a magazine.
through a
Yeah,
weekly paper. God, the press loved you because so I know from listening to Fast Eddie. I remember doing an interview with him and also hearing Lemmy talking about the importance of a producer. They had a guy called Vic Mail who was just really essential to the band. Was Spot somebody that was kind of really held the band together in those early years in the studio?
so Spot was SST's house engineer, house producer. He not only recorded Hüsker Dü, but he recorded records for the Minutemen and Black Flag and Saccharine Trust. Uh, he worked with the Descendants. He Spot worked at a studio called our studio called Total Access in Redondo Beach, and he was able to get an overnight rate. So we would go in. I think we started at 10 p.m. and would go until 6 a.m. in the morning, uh, because it was the cheapest rate that we could get. And Wynn Davis, the guy who owns the studio, actually right after Spot passed away here back in in February, uh, said, it's crazy. Here I was during the day in my studio trying to figure out how Steely Dan recorded Asia, and Spot is in here at night, and Spot was making history. So, which is true. Uh, Spot was a great producer to work with. Uh, he, he and I feel it's a lot of the SST records get knocked sometime because people don't like the production per se. But Spot had his production had an economy to it that totally fit with the bands that he was working with. It totally fit with what SST was doing, and we worked with Spot up through New Day Rising, and then for Flip Your Wig, that was the first record that was solely produced by Bob and Grant. Um, but all the SST records, you know, were co-produced Spot, Bob, and Grant.
Yes. Because on Motorhead's third album they did as the famous three, the early years. I mean, they decided to have Fast Eddie and do the production, and it was a disaster, and that was kind of the last of the albums those three did. I mean, was it strange having sort of Grant and Bob producing the last two albums for Hüsker Dü. Did that work okay, or was that a little bit more problematic?
Here again, that was an area that I consciously decided to stay out of. They were adamant about uh, being the producers. Uh, Sonically, I think the records are a little bit too high end, a little bit too trebly. Um, I always felt that the bass wasn't being represented enough in the final mix. But so the third record with Warner Brothers, Warner's wanted an outside producer, and so Bob and Grant would, and I thought that was a great idea to have a fresh set of ears listen to what we were recording and have them produce it and mix it. um but of course that never happened, so
That didn't happen. So what,
yeah.
with the Candy Apple, because that was where John, I remember John Peel was a big fan, and I remember him playing Sorry Somehow, which was an epic song. The two ballads on it, I don't, sorry, no, not Sorry Somehow, Too Far Down and Hardly Getting Over It. Yes, were you quite surprised with the kind of intensity of those two tracks?
I was, yeah. You know, definitely a lot of emotion on both of those tracks. Uh, they were um, good songs live too. And it kind of gave the band uh, an opportunity to kind of shift gears and move the mood in the live set. I'm very happy with how Candy Apple Gray turned out. It seems online in a lot of threads. People tend to knock Candy Apple Gray as being um, one of our lesser recordings, but then at the same time, a lot of people are like, "Oh no, it's like one of their greatest recordings." So
Yes. Well,
yeah.
there you go. Because you toured the UK around that time, and then excitedly, 87, my first ever Glastonbury festival. I was that age. I got my ticket. I thought, Husker Du, my favorite band of the 80s. I'm going to go and see them. You were playing, you came to you came to the Glastonbury Festival, didn't you? Friday afternoon, in fact. Can you remember much about it?
Oh yeah, no, Glastonbury was an incredible experience. So, uh, playing on the main stage, just all of the people that were out there in front of us. And I'd like to think that maybe there were at least 20,000 people paying attention to what we were doing. But uh, the thing that I felt was the craziest was literally 2 hours after we are done with our set and we're walking through the little village area, they've already got bootleg cassettes of our show for sale. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me?
Yes, I know. They're very industrious little people, aren't they? But then, in my enthusiasm, I bought a ticket for your Sunday night show at the Town and Country Club.
Oh, nice.
So,
Yep.
so there you go. So your UK tour was again kind of quite a tight schedule at that stage. Can you remember much about that particular tour and those particular nights?
Yeah. So that tour, yeah, I mean, it was. We always tried to work our tours very tight. Uh, you don't want to have a lot of time off. It's the upcoming UltraBomb is based on the same way. If you're not playing, you're not getting paid. Is the bottom
Yes.
line for a working musician, and but that tour was good. We actually had we had a coach which was rather comfortable to tour in, then had plenty of room for the gear, and we were uh, sleeping. We're able to sleep on the coach if we had any overnight drives, and it was good. It was a I mean, we were on Warner Brothers, so press was all taken care of. It was It was a nice tour.
Yes, because I must admit, 87, I still think one of the great years of music. You had Sign of the Times, the double album. You had sort of, Warehouse, another double album. They're quite colossal pieces of work. And so how long did it take in the studio to record Warehouse?
Warehouse we spent quite a bit of time on. That was recorded in Minneapolis. How's the audio? I just stepped outside.
Yes.
Still okay?
Yeah, no, it's fine. The connection's good.
Yep. Good. So, so Bob and Grant lived very near where the studio was, so they spent a lot of time on that record. I live in Red Wing, Minnesota, which is a little over an hour outside of Minneapolis. So a lot of times we'd get done in the studio. I would drive home. They'd stay in the studio and keep working on stuff. And sometimes I'd come back the next day and I'd be like, what did you do to that mix? So in a way, I'm like really happy with, Warehouse probably was the most time that we had spent on a record. I think some of the things that ended up happening with the mix, didn't particularly agree with. Bob had an incredible guitar solo on Bed of Nails that kind of reminded me of like Neil Young. That he ended up scrapping, and he put a different guitar solo on it. And I'm like, oh man, you should have kept that first one. But he was the producer, so.
Yeah, and the songs are very tight, aren't they? The Could You Be the One? What's your memory of that one? Because that's obviously that was the single, but also an epic kind of record as well. Did you sort of feel when you kind of played it that yes, this is definitely going to sort of chart well or be popular?
Yeah, and we also did a video for that as well. That
yes
turned out quite nice. Yeah, you never know what is going to end up being the most popular cut. You can record something and put it out as a single and thinking like, yeah, this is gonna be the song of the summer or something like that, and then people gravitate to a different cut. So I was looking on Spotify recently. The most streamed song on Spotify by Hüsker Dü is "Don't Want to Know If You're Lonely," and it's I think "Could You Be the One" is the next most popular stream, but it's only like not even quite half of what "Don't Want to Know If You're Lonely" is. So
yes, it is interesting because I do remember buying that album and consuming it. And coming back to it, you mentioned production. It does sound very tinny, doesn't it? I have to confess. It has
a little bit. I definitely think all of those records would benefit from remastering, and hopefully someday they will be.
Yeah, yeah. I know it's funny because I just remember I can't remember it being this. It's almost like the Smiths' first album, which was a little bit like it felt a little bit thin, that album, and it's strange how slightly I don't know, tinny probably isn't the right word, and it's probably offensive, but it didn't seem to have, from the album before, Candy Apple, it seemed a little bit different. So but my memory of it is still awesome, and I still think it was good. Just on the artwork, because it's quite an amazing cover. I mean, whose idea was that sort of came together?
That was Grant's. Grant took care of all of the graphics. He had fake name graphics. That was what he always credited the graphics to, but he did all of the album covers. That whole thing was set up in the studio that we recorded it in with then black lights and they all the fluorescent paint and all that, and brought in a Dan Corrigan, a photographer that we worked very closely with, and it it is what it turned out wonderful. I don't necessarily know what Grant was striving for there, but it looked really cool. And then he did all that spin art on the back cover, and Warehouse is actually the first album that we released that we had a photo of the band on
Yes,
the
sitting there.
back cover. And we had always shied away from having our portraits on record covers because we didn't want people to judge the record by how we looked. We wanted the records to be judged for themselves, for the music. Um, the first time that we played in Hamburg, Germany, we that was one of our first tours. So it was just the three of us uh, with our road manager and another guy that helped do our stage setup and sound. And so we were setting up our own gear. And everybody in the audience was just kind of watching us set up. And once we were set up, we started playing. It was probably the third or fourth song before the audience realized that we were the band that they paid to come and see.
Yes.
And the afterwards was like, we had no idea. We thought you were the roadies and we're just warming up. And then we realized it was you. And it's like, well, what did you think we were going to look like? And they were like, well, from listening to, you know, Land Speed Record and Metal Circus and all the hardcore stuff, we expected you to be these big, tall, American punks in black leather with spiky mohawks and all this stuff. And it's like, nope, you just got three regular guys that like to rock.
Yes. Not a six pack amongst you really at that stage, was there? Not, like no t-shirts off in, bare chest and I don't know.
Right.
There was a bit of a trend, wasn't there, in the 80s for the bands to start stripping off and getting naked. It was unnecessary.
Well, look at all those photos of Henry Rollins when he fronted Black Flag. I think he played most of those shows in just a pair of gym shorts.
Yes, this is true. And then the Red Hot Chili Peppers. So when sort of as we sort of because having done this show for quite a few years, most bands have a bit of a 5-year narrative. They get that honeymoon period of 12 months and then a single. And in this country, we had John Peel, which was a massive kind of thing. He was this beacon who collated and curated this fantastic show. So we were introduced to so much good music. And then the first couple of, there was the singles, then an album, touring, second album, things going well, third album. And then most bands do putter out. What was the atmosphere like towards the end of 87 after that album, Warehouse came out?
Well, after we had signed with Warner Brothers, there were definitely, there was a strain that was put on the band. Major labels don't like artists who manage themselves. They like to deal with a manager that is not the artist. So all of the things that we had always taken care of on our own were slowly being taken away from us. Uh, we had, a booking agency. We had, a publicist. We had management. All of the little details were being taken care of by other people. So in a way, all of a sudden we have more time, but slowly you don't quite have the same grasp of control. And I think that in particular was hard on Grant. And now at this point we're doing bigger tours. Everybody's got their own room at night. It's not like we're as together as a unit as we had been all along. And the Bob and Grant songwriting competition was really coming to a head. Um, it went from being three kids getting together and having a laugh and making music that we liked, and hopefully other people liked it too. At this point now, it's definitely a business. Yes. And the Beatles talked about it. there's been extensive things written on that, and it's true. Um, it wasn't as much fun it as it had used to have been. And we had always said, well, how long are we going to do this? Who knows? Well, let's just keep doing it as long as we're having fun. And it was starting to get to a point where it wasn't necessarily fun.
Yes. Did your, because David, your manager, sort of committed suicide. Did you sort of see parallels with the Beatles at that stage? Or was it just kind of another kind of confusing moment in the band?
Yeah, that was losing David was tough. It uh, definitely put a strain on the band. Um, yeah, that I would say it was certainly a contributing factor to our demise.
Yes, God, so. How did because what's the kind of moment where you realized, to quote Joy Division, you walk away, not probably in silence, but to paraphrase that moment, when do you realize that the band really is kind of over?
Well, when we played our last show at the Blue Note in Columbia, and that was the night where Grant's um, drug addiction kind of really showed the most. Bob canceled our the next show. We drove straight back to Minneapolis, and that was pretty much it. I would have liked to have seen the band continue, uh, but Grant was. I think at that point, maybe Bob had already made up his mind about starting a solo career, and this just kind of skipped him forward a beat. Uh, and really, Grant wanted to. You look at all of the recordings that Grant did post Husker, and Grant liked to mix it up and try different things, and I think he kind of knew that wasn't going to necessarily work with working with Bob, and and Bob obviously has had a great 40-year career now. Um, and Bob keeps churning out great records, but I wouldn't necessarily say that Bob is, well, except for what was it? What they called the hubcap record, where he did the electronic thing. I
Oh
mean, he
yes.
he did try something different, and then he kind of went back to what he does best. So
Yes, I know. Yeah. So then you sort of you have a complete change of career here, don't you? This is kind of an exciting time. When did you decide the restaurant business was going to be your next passion?
when the band broke up, I went back to working in restaurants. I had been doing that, in the early days of Husker. I liked it. Uh, and so in 1988, I meet a chef in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis, and he and I become, his name's Lenny Russo. He and I become very good friends. Uh, Lenny eventually convinces me to move from the front of the house, waiting tables, to the back of the house, and starts to mentor me and teach me how to cook. And I just naturally took to it. Lenny was a great mentor, and we're still great friends to this day. He he goes on to become one of the top chefs in Minnesota. Uh, Nominated for James Beard Awards here in the U.S. Numerous times for top chef in the Midwest. Ultimately, usually just missing out to a chef in either Chicago or Kansas City. But I just kind of took it from there, and then stumbled into my first, you know, chef gig, and I managed to stretch that into a long career, and I had a really great time. It was very creative. We were cooking. beautiful food, farm to table, made from scratch, that type of thing. Early on in my culinary career, I actually spent a summer in London and um, worked at the greenhouse for Gary Rhodes.
Oh, right, Gary, that's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Hmm.
Did you, I mean, is it, because when I was much younger, I worked in a bakery, and the intensity of that lifestyle is quite something. You can't have a off day, you can't miss a moment, you have to be really on it, even when you're not feeling it. You can't hide. How did you cope with that kind of level of intensity for such a long period of time? Because there is no downtime. You're constantly, focused. It's very hard. Most of the feedback, if you get any, is one where people are picking up a little negative rather than they giving you, washing you with great praise. So, how did you cope with that kind of right? Another day, another week, keeping the restaurant, taking a holiday. I remember my boss just wouldn't take a holiday at that stage because he didn't trust anybody to keep it going when he wasn't there.
Uh, yeah, that's a really good point. I did throw myself into it, and you'd work 60 to 70 hours a week. It was long hours, uh, but I had always seen a parallel between music and working in kitchens, and you do get that immediate feedback you know from your customers. And I always welcomed negative feedback, and I always encourage customers, like, if there is something wrong, you need to tell me what it is. Otherwise, I personally will not be able to fix it and learn and get better. uh, I always feel that if you are constantly surrounded by people that just tell you how great you are, eventually you start to believe that, and then you're stuck, because at that point you believe that you can't do anything wrong and you're not going to grow. So, as a musician as well, it's like I welcome negative feedback. Um, in life, you need that in order to grow.
Yes. And how did you cope with people? Because obviously, when you started, it was kind of like there was the odd vegetarian dish. No one had allergies in the old days. And then, sort of during that period, you would have gone, my God, from then to when you finish, I believe you finished, the world of what people expected and the sort of food that the people wanted to order was so different. How did you deal with those changes?
Well, we would rewrite our menu, sometimes almost daily, but definitely, uh, things would evolve through the week. We always offered a vegetarian option. Uh, and I take that from being on the road and meeting a lot of vegetarians or vegans, or knowing, like, you have to have something for these people. And uh, there, in the restaurant business, it's the customer is never wrong, but they're not necessarily right either. But they're the ones that are paying for the meal. You want them to also have an enjoyable time and a good meal, so you try to be as accommodating as you can. um, it always kind of bothered me with chefs who act like, oh, well, people are stupid if they don't understand what I just put in front of them. It's like, well, yeah, you're brilliant, you're a genius, but this person wants their steak cooked well done. That's fine.
Yeah.
You know, they want to put extra salt on it. That's fine. It's their experience. I'm not there to force an experience on them.
Yes. Well, I was amazed because we used to sort of fly into Vegas, have a few nights there, see a Cirque du Soleil show, then go and do a road trip. And celebrity chefs, or just the kind of rise of that celebrity chef in America is huge. I'm not sure if it's the same in the UK, though I'm in the UK, but they're just suddenly that
Yeah.
superstar chef
So I
is
would say
quite.
Marco Pierre White was definitely one of the top first celebrity chefs, and he had his reputation of kicking people out of his restaurants in London, to a point where that became the show, and that's why the place was always booked. It's like, oh well, let's go in and see if he's going to get pissed off at a customer for challenging his genius, you know. But even he, over the years now, has he's softened, right?
Yes, we all do in the end, don't we? So when did
Yeah.
is the restaurant now? Is that now sort of over your sort of?
I actually got out of the restaurant business in 2010.
Right.
And personally, I think it was a good time to get out. Uh, the only thing that I miss from working, running restaurants, owning a restaurant, are those relationships that you develop with your coworkers and with your customers. Uh, but I still have a lot of friends, and I
Yeah.
still keep in touch with a lot of the people that I used to work with. Uh, so that was a really great career and phase of my life that I always look back fondly on. Now I actually enjoy cooking now more because I'm
Yes.
just doing it for myself or for friends. Uh, so that brought that joy back to into my life. And and after I got out of the restaurant business, like for the last 13 years, I've been selling wine for a distributor here in Minnesota. We represent a lot of really fantastic small producers throughout Europe as well as the rest of the world. But um, we direct import a lot of wine from Europe. So
Yes.
that's 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 also has been enjoyable. But now the next phase in my life is to get back to being a full-time musician.
Yes. So did you have the bass slightly put away until 2010, and then I'm guessing this, did it start to come back in and you thought, oh yes, I remember this. Oh, this
Right. So
did
so actually, I went 14 years without even picking up a bass and playing. Uh, in 2000, and I want to say it was probably 2002. Um, I met uh, a, there's a famous jazz piano trio called the Bad Plus. I know that they played London a lot. They played Ronnie Scott's. Uh, they two of the main members are from Minnesota, and at the time they were recording for Sony, and they had just put out a record, and on that record they did a cover of Nirvana's "Smells Like Teen Spirit." And a customer of mine gave me a copy of their CD and said, "I think you might like these guys." And they had a show coming up at a club in Minneapolis, and there was an interview with them in our local arts paper, City Pages. And in that interview, they cited Hüsker Dü as a big influence. So I went to see them, and after the show, I just wanted to go up and say, "Hey, I really like what you're doing. Thank you for listening, being Husker fans or whatever." And when I met Dave King, the drummer, he's like, "I've got this fantastic idea for a for a band, and you're the perfect bass player for it." So I went out and I got a new bass and had to go buy an amp and started playing again. And it took a couple of years for us to finally get together, but then we got together. That's how the Gang Font was created. Gang Font recorded an album that came out on a independent label out of New York called Thirsty Ear that puts out a lot of jazz records. And that record, it was one of those things where it was. Uh, I personally love it, but I think the um, the critics in particular didn't know what to do with it. So it was too rock for the uh, and too out for the jazz guys. and for the rock guys, it was too far out. It was too avant garde. But Gang Fight is still together. We actually have a second album that was recorded 13 years ago that we're finally going to get released, and so that's exciting. But yeah, that's how I got back into playing bass, and from Gang Fight that led to me joining a trio in Minnesota called Porcupine, replacing, that was a band that had been around. I had seen them. I'd liked them. Their bass player had to step away from the business. He just didn't have time with his career. And so I was in Porcupine for a little over 3 years, and that was exciting. That was a lot of fun. We did some great touring, opening up for bands like the Flesh Eaters and Flipper and Mudhoney and Built to Spill. But that kind of got to a point where it just wasn't really working out. So Casey, the guitar player, he's like, this isn't really a good fit anymore. I'm going to change the direction of the band. And so the drummer, Ian, he left to start his own project. And at that point, this is when Finney McConnell messages me and says, "Hey, I've got this great idea for a band. I know Jamie Oliver. He's the greatest punk rock drummer on the planet." And simultaneously, he had messaged Jamie going "Hey, I got this great idea for a band. I know the greatest punk rock bass player on the planet. Let's put a band together." And that's how UltraBomb got together. And the concept came together in early August, and a month later, the three of us end up in Berlin. And over the course of 4 days, we wrote the entire record, and plus tagged on a cover of Sonic Reducer. And it just turned out amazing. It's like Finney had these riffs. We would work into an arrangement. We would get it recorded. So 4 songs the first day, 6 songs the second day. And then Jamie had a gig on the third day. That's when I showed Finney all of my lyrics, and he's like, "I've got the whole record figured out." And on the 4th day, he sang the whole record. We did some on the fly editing to kind of help with the flow of things. And we were like, "Holy crap, this is amazing. This record is so good." We felt like we recorded a masterpiece, and we still do. So
it is quite extraordinary, the intensity. I mean, it's quite a punt to take just to sort of have that kind of moment. It's not like going, "Oh yeah, they're going to meet down the road," but to go to Berlin to commit to this project is quite an undertaking. So you must have had a lot of confidence that this was kind of worth the airfare.
I took a leap of faith, and Finney was, we had been chatting back and forth on Messenger. He's like, "Oh, I'll be in Berlin. I'm doing some solo shows. I've got some studio time booked. Oh, Jamie just happens to be in Berlin at the same time because he's drumming with this German group." And I'm like, I should go there and get together with these guys. So I bought a ticket and flew to Berlin, and really that was the first time that we had ever met face to face, was when we were all together in the studio. The engineer couldn't believe that we just wrote those songs in front of him as he was sitting there, and it just fell together so organically, so comfortably. It literally felt like we had been a band and playing together for years. We all get along like we're great old friends. It's fantastic. In a way, it took me back to those early days of rehearsing in the basement with Husker, and it was a full on group effort, and we were just having fun. We were having the time of our life.
Yeah, I mean, it is incredibly intense. I love there's a track on there called "Fear Your Gods," which is
Yeah.
phenomenal, and then Star, and then obviously Stickman versus Hangman, which again, yeah, there's an intensity which is quite extraordinary, and sort of it's like a band who's probably been around a bit more longer than just, you know, getting together, which is quite amazing. But you know, there's your experience, there's obviously Jamie, and then Finney, which yes, the three of you. But to create such a sort of a solid sound so quickly must be quite unusual, really. Because most people's early record is like, yeah, that's good. I can see it's going here, but to hit it quite so instantly must be quite surprising.
It was, musically, we all just meshed, right from the get go. Uh, I am still amazed at how well Finney took. So I wrote all of the lyrics, and all of those songs had been written, over, probably a 2 or 3 year period leading up to um, my arrival in Berlin. And as I wrote these lyrics, I mean, there was some type of tune or melody in my head, uh, more so for cadence. Uh, but how he was able to make them match what we had recorded just totally blew me away.
Yes, I'm not surprised actually. But before that, we have one of those kind of moments that I experienced as well about 2016, suddenly getting diagnosed with cancer. You also had that moment as well a few years ago. So did that? Mine was like completely out of the blue. It's like, oh, we just had a test. Oh, perhaps we'll need to give you a scan.
Right.
Oh, you better
Yeah.
come back and
So
have a
so
quick
that was
chat.
just last summer. After we got the record recorded, got it mixed, and we we stumbled on a few tours. We had to, you know, uh, there were dates canceled, in Canada due to visa issue. There were dates canceled in Ireland, in England due to COVID issues, and then we were all set to go back to England, and I get the cancer diagnosis, and so prostate cancer. Um, Jamie and Finney fly into Minneapolis. We played one show last July, uh, for at the Hook and Ladder Club for their roots rock and deep blues festival, and it was fantastic. It was so much fun. Uh, People were losing their minds. People were crying. It was just great. And then literally a week after that, not even a week after that show, I was uh, went into the Mayo Clinic, and they did prostate surgery, removed my prostate. Uh, Fortunately, they believed that everything was contained to the prostate. My margins were clean. Uh, my subsequent testing in the last year, everything has come back clean. So, I'm healthy, and I'm ready to get back out on the road. So,
Yes, God, that's great news. Did you when you sort of had that kind of wow, that was a bit of a moment. Has that sort of given you an extra focus now with the band and the tour and sort of possibly a follow-up album?
uh, yes, it certainly brings back a sense of urgency. You know, don't take anything for granted. You never know what life could toss at you, and I'm done. I don't want to waste any more time. I want to get out there and get this band out on the road. The three of us want to see this band, continue on and be a success. And we're planning on writing new material while we're together on this tour, to get it recorded later this year, and get over and do a European and UK and Ireland dates as well. So
Yes,
this fall.
absolutely. This is
Yeah.
good. So it's a great looking tour you've got coming up next week, finishing at the Las Vegas Punk and Bowling weekend. Are those, I saw the lineup. Is that something that, as somebody who's been in the music world for a long time, is that a sort of an event that's kind of an important date on the calendar for anybody?
Uh, Yes, our first show at Punk Rock Bowling is a club showcase, and we're opening up for the Dickies. And the Dickies were a huge influence on Hüsker Dü back in the early days. There's a quote from Bob, I believe, that said, when we first got together, we wanted to play faster than the Ramones, and then we heard the Dickies, and now we want to play faster than the Dickies. So that'll be great. And Philip and Stan Lee are still in the band, and so really looking forward to that show. And then just being on the main stage at Punk Rock Bowling for the final day, I think is going to be fantastic. It's Suicidal Tendencies and the Dropkick Murphys are the Dropkick Murphys are the headliner that day, and just to wrap up the whole festival, I think it's fantastic.
Yes, it's going to be good. Did you manage to sort of protect your hearing during your time in Hüsker Dü?
Yes, it's easier to control your stage volume and to protect your hearing. I was actually, for a long time after Husker broke up, I was kind of surprised at the fact that I didn't have a lot of hearing loss. For the last 3.5 years, I have been working in an industrial flour mill, and that's probably done more damage to my hearing than all the time I've spent playing rock and roll. So out of the mill now, back to the stage.
Yes, that's that low level hum, or not even low level, that constant noise is quite something for a musician. Because talking to Jamie, it was an extraordinary thing that he's got so many projects. He's got doing drumming classes or tuition or college. He's got various bands. How do you manage to keep it all together? Because in the old days, probably you were just in one band, one project, and doing it. Now it seems like everyone has to sort of juggle quite a lot of kind of commitments and different projects to keep it all running, I suppose.
Well, quitting the flour mill, that's one thing that certainly is going to help. Being a parent is a full-time job. Having a full-time job to pay your bills is a full-time job, and really, devoting enough time to being a musician to create a full-time job. 3 full-time jobs. One of them's got to go, so I quit the mill. That will help quite a bit.
Yes, absolutely. I would imagine that was. Did you say it was a flour mill you were working in?
Yes.
Wow, yes, I could imagine that was pretty hard. And then, I mean, obviously, as we experience with life, the ups and downs and people passing. How did were you? How did you process, sort of experience of, Grant going? Because obviously you'd been together for so long. Was that, was that something that you had vaguely expected, or was it?
So Grant. Grant's, I knew that Grant of his cancer diagnosis, but it was one of those things where we still expected him to have uh, a few more years. Then he went in for a routine procedure, and something happened, and he bled out on the table, and that's what killed him. And that was the shocker. Nobody expected it to happen just like that. And so suddenly, after the news of the cancer diagnosis, uh, and that year was the year that we were working on the box set with Numero Group, Savage Young Do. Grant put a lot of time and effort into the package, into working with Numero on that. So it was very unfortunate that Grant wasn't around to see that release. And then, and then about a year after that, Terry Katzman, who worked with Hüsker Dü from the very beginning, originally, he recorded a lot of those early shows. He had a heart attack and suddenly died. So that's like two main figures from the Husker, the original Husker nucleus that now are suddenly gone. um
Yes.
It's tough. UltraBomb actually will, we're mixing in some of Grant's Hüsker songs into the set, as a way, for me to honor him and his memory and his songwriting. But I also feel like, somebody has to you know, keep Grant in the consciousness and remind people how such a magnificent songwriter he was.
Yes. Will Bridget or his son, will they come and see the UltraBomb on this tour at all?
Yeah, I'm sure Bridget will be at the show. And actually, I talk to Bridget on a regular basis. I have not seen Carl for about a year. I met Carl after Grant had passed, but um, super great guy. Looks
Yes.
so much like Grant when he was the same age. It blows me away.
Yeah. So what, you've got your set list. Which Grant songs will you be performing?
Well, Don't Want to Know If You're Lonely. We have talked about doing Dead Set on Destruction. It's not funny anymore, for sure. So Don't Want to Know and Dead Set will definitely be in the set. And I don't know. Yeah, we're just want to mix in some Husker stuff with the UltraBomb set, and we'll add a few Mahone's songs in there as well.
Yes.
And you might hear a subs song in there.
Excellent. Well, so because when I remember doing an interview with Woody Woodmansey from the Spiders from Mars, and he was talking about when he was doing a project with Tony Visconti, when they would do that Holy Holy kind of experience, playing Bowie songs. They would just get together the day before the tour started, which I thought was, wow, that was quite tight. How much time do you give yourselves before you hit the stage on the first night?
We will have a total of 4 days of full band practices under our belt by the time we play our first show on the tour. So Jamie is actually already in Minnesota. Finney comes in on Sunday, and once we are all together on Sunday, we'll start rehearsing the full band. And I've got a practice space here in Red Wing, Minnesota, that we'll be able to practice anytime that we want, as long as we want. We're not restricted by any time constraints there. So we'll have plenty of time to tighten it up, and everybody's ready. So
yes, well, I mean, best of luck. I mean, yes, like I said, it's been brilliant hearing the new material from the band, so that's good. So look, thank you ever so much for your time. This has been amazing, and if you want, I can always send you a link to the interview, and then you can use it on the website. And
that'd be fantastic. Yeah,
that'll be absolutely fine. But I'll do that very soon because the tour is starting very soon as well. But I think yes, it was lovely talking to Jamie, and I think I'm doing an interview with Finney as well soon. So there you go.
Oh, cool. Yeah, nice.
But look, have a lovely day, and thank you ever so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, David.
Take care. Thank you ever so much.
Yep.
See you
Cheers.
later. Bye-bye. And that, dear listener, is the end of the interview. A massive thank you to Greg Norton for giving me the time for that interview. And as I said, now a member of UltraBomb, who've got a tour and also a new album that is coming out, as you probably gathered from that interview. I'll give you the link below in the notes. But anyway, this has been the C86 Show, David Eastaugh. So if you want to contact me, you can on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Just do C86 Show. All these interviews have been archived. Aren't you lucky? You can find those on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. It's true. And probably some others. Anyway, have a great week. Stay safe.